All of my questions today are aimed at getting you guys demerits.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we are back together again for another episode in our Biblical Theology project. This time we are discussing Deuteronomy 17, 18, and 19. And I am so thankful once again to be here with our regular team. Why don't we go ahead and bring in Brother Micah. Micah, how's it going today?
I'll make it.
You'll make it. You've said that a couple of times. Yeah. I know you're not feeling well.
Yeah. A little under the weather. I apologize to our audience for how my voice sounds today, but we should make it through.
You're not going to cough on any of us, are you?
Yeah, I'm going to give all of you what I've got.
Keep your distance.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about meeting over these cameras. So anyway, well, we're happy to have you. Sorry that you're not feeling well. I do hope you feel better soon. But how about you, Eric? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Very, very excited to get into these incredibly interesting chapters. I'll say just for the audience, I say that every week, and it sounds redundant, and it can sound insincere when it's just repeated over and over again. But I honestly, never mind you, Greg. But honestly, I get a lot out of preparing for these episodes and just trying to learn as much as possible for my own sake, for the sake of our viewers, and I really enjoy it a lot.
That's good. Well, that paves the way for a tongue-in-cheek greeting to Greg, the most insincere guy I know and a guy who gets nothing out of anything. None of that's true.
That's absolutely true. 100%.
Greg, how about you? How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm actually doing really well. Got over to Howell this weekend and spent a little bit of time with at least with two of you. And so that was had a great trip over and had a pleasant time, good weekend worshiping God yesterday. And so doing great. Ready to
Didn't have to drive back home through a blizzard or a hurricane or a tornado.
No, it's like the one and only time that it hasn't been, God opening up the earth and trying to swallow me as I drive home. And so
it is amazing. People would probably barely even believe it if we told them the weather.
Yeah, I think people would think I was making it up. Some of the things I've experienced driving home.
If you like weather and you've ever tracked any anomalies of weather in between, in our part of the state, that's usually when Greg is driving between the west side and the east side of Michigan. Yeah. So anyway, well, it's nice to see you guys as always. If you're watching this and you haven't read Deuteronomy 17, 18, and 19 in a while, we'd encourage you to read through those on your own. We won't be able to touch on every single detail, but we are going to highlight the things that stand out most to us. And I'm going to get us started with a question from the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 17. We're seeing something again that we've talked about before. I don't want us to belabor the point. I certainly am not trying to coax you guys into getting any demerits. But once again, we're seeing this repetition that their sacrificial animals can't have any blemish or defect. And so, of course, just to take the threat of the demerit off the table, of course, we all know that will be fulfilled in Christ at some point down the road. But is there any other reason why you guys would think that this is being repeated over and over and over again? And based on some of our last conversation, where sometimes maybe we feel like people are leading, I'll just let you know what I think, and then I'll hear what you guys think. But it seems to me that the human tendency to begin to devalue our own sinfulness might lead to this kind of a thing where we think, well, okay, we got to offer sacrifices, we got to do these things, but does my sin really require my best? Can't I just offer something that really doesn't cost me as much? And so if God says something once, it's important. But if he repeats something over and over and over again, all throughout the law, I just think this is really speaking to a deeper human tendency that people, both under the old covenant and even now, we should really constantly be reminded our sin requires a terrible price, and it is not something that we should begin to devalue in our mind and start to think that God will just accept anything to overlook these things. That is a dangerous attitude always. And of course, that's true, in our covenant as well. But that's kind of where I was asking this question. If you guys don't have anything new or additional, we don't have to belabor the point. But we're reading it again. I'm like, we've read this so many times. We've talked about this so many times. Just your thoughts, if you have any.
I think that sometimes we read these requirements for a lamb without, or an animal without blemish or defect, and we tend to only see it through the soteriological lens, like or Christological, you could say. Well, Christ is the lamb that has no blemish or defect. He's like us in all respects, yet without sin. And not only that, but he's one with the Father from all eternity. sharing in his divine nature, and he's the one who's given for us, so he's of infinite value. And that's why he can be what he is for us and to us. But there's more than that, I think, here. I think that there's also something of doxological value, meaning teaching us how God deserves to be worshipped. And he doesn't deserve to be worshipped with the scraps of your life. You know, no, I'm not going to say what I was about to say because that's going to get me a demerit.
You thought the other things didn't? This was going to be even worse than that?
Yeah, you already opened the door to it.
I did, but
I'm going to say this so you don't have to. And you're like, well, then I'm going to do it.
I'm just curious of where the line is in your mind because of all the things you just said, that now whatever you're about to say is somehow even above and beyond. So that's the part that shocked me. You're right. I did. I took away the threat.
It was going to be okay, I'll just do it. In Malachi, they've been brought back from exile, and they're being excoriated once again because they're bringing God all their lame animals in sacrifices and things like that. And basically, what they're saying to God is, you're not worth being worshipped with all that we are, with our best. You're not worth that kind of a sacrifice for us. So, you know, you do need to see the soteriological implications of these things, but this is also teaching them something about how God deserves to be worshipped.
Amen. Well said. Based on your own conscience, one demerit for Micah. So, what about you guys?
Yeah, I'm going to completely agree. I think this goes all the way back to, you know, Cain and Abel. God's value and therefore our response to that. It will tell you exactly, or it'll tell you with great clarity what you think about God based upon your response to him, right? I mean, in a way, religion is the response to God. And so what does that look like pouring out in your life? If I give God whatever I think is just enough to keep this God happy and to keep him not mad at me or to keep me in his good graces, that tells you a lot of what I think about God. And so I think this repeated need to give him the best, give him the thing without blemish, that perfect thing, when in all reality he's due everything, he deserves it all, but this is all he's asking from you. Our tendency is to go, okay, well then how much can I dial that down that's enough? If this is what you're owed and this is what you're asking for, how much can I get away with? I think that's what it looks like in our lives often.
Whenever the word unblemished is used in reference to an animal, obviously it's always mentioned in the context of sacrifices. And because animal sacrifices were used as substitutes for sinners, for committing sins, meaning the animal was killed in place of the sinner, that's how I understand it, they had to be without defect. Because the sinner is blemished, because he sinned, the substitute must be unblemished. It's like if you're trying to appease God or you're trying to satisfy God and you commit a sin, you can't give him, it's not slop in exchange for slop. It's, it's a perfect in the place of imperfect. And that unblemished is the word that the Old Testament uses. That in order for this exchange to be made, in order for the animal to act as the substitute for the sinner, the animal must necessarily be unblemished because the sinner is blemished by his sin.
All right, fair enough. So I'm going to ask a question, and again, I mean, kind of like you were worried about the temptation of us earning ourselves demerit. Maybe we just need to put a pin on this. But in verses 14 through 17, we see God anticipating that the people are going to ask for a king when they get into the land. Now, we know what we know, and we know that that's not going to be something God's pleased with. And so maybe I have to ask this question when we get past Judges and into 1 Samuel. But why, if the desire for a king, which we know isn't a good thing there, why is it anticipated here? Why is he dangling this in front of them here? Thoughts on that?
My mind goes back to Exodus chapter 15, verse 18. Moses says that the Lord shall reign forever and ever. And that's the verb which is related to the noun of a king. So when they talk about, I'll give you a king, or you'll ask for a king, that's the noun version. This is you'll king over us, or you'll reign over us, is how the translation is in the New American Standard. And so I think that we are seeing God as their king. And so they have had God as their king. And I think that this anticipation is why isn't he giving them someone else? Well, he's given them leaders. They have Moses. They're going to have, suitable leadership. But he is their king, which I think is the intention of these types of passages. And so even when another king is given, that he's still, unlike the other nations that are around them, because there's an explicit reference, like when you want to be like the other nations around you, they still won't be, because God is kinging over them or reigning over them.
I think I follow what you're saying. I guess that's not what I saw happening here. When you ask for this thing that I'm going to tell you later you shouldn't have asked for, or what maybe you should have known you shouldn't ask for, but when you ask for it, I'm going to do this. And so the umbrage or the outrage that we see displayed there, and again, we probably have to wait till we get there, seems odd when it's anticipated this far, literally hundreds of years in advance, right?
We've seen two themes running, parallel. Back in Genesis, I think it was 49, we were told that the scepter wouldn't depart from Judah. So there is a declaration of some kingly line that is coming through these people. But there's also the understanding that God is king over them. There can be a dual tendency where God can want something or can tell them to do something, and they can go through the external motions of it, but they can do it with the wrong heart. Like, I think we understand these general concepts. So I agree with you and what you're saying. I don't think it's contradictory to what I was saying. I think these things are parallel. So that's how I tend to view it. And I would agree with what you said, though. I think that you're right, because when they ask for it, they aren't seeking a king based on what God has told them, and they are seeking, I think, not only to go against the God that they're the king that God would give them, but to even turn away from God as their king and to just be like the other nations, to have a king to reign over them, I think is what he's warning them not to do here. We'll see how it turns out, I suppose.
So what you're saying is that they're going to want a king because they're going to want to be like all the other nations. And the fact that they're going to need to choose a king, or God will choose a king to reign over them, is him saying, I'm not going to give you that, at least not in any permanent sense. I'm not going to make you like the rest of the nations. I'm not going to give you what you want in that way. Is that what you're saying?
I think I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that he is, my initial point was, he has given them a king, and it's himself. And just like Moses said, if you don't go up with us, don't send us up from here, because what will distinguish us from all the other peoples on the earth if it's not your presence with us? Like, that's the thing that matters most. Moses got it. I'm not sure that they'll always get it. And if they want a king to rule over them, to be like all the other nations, then they are, I believe, expressly denying the thing that set them apart and made them unique, was, quite frankly, that God dwelt among them and God himself was their king.
So do you think, and again, maybe this is demerit, I'm not trying to get you to fall into a trap. Do you think if they had asked with more pure intentions, when they do ask in the future, if they had asked with better intentions, it wouldn't have been met with rebuke and anger? Not that God can ever be angry, right, Micah? But
maybe.
Okay.
I think, and it's weird when you deal with hypotheticals, so I'm speculating.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that they should have waited until God told them. I'll use an analogy of, like, with parents. I intend to through my household, we intend to provide our children with dinner, but we get annoyed when they're like, "When's dinner? Can I have dinner right now?" Like, well, just be quiet and we'll give you dinner when we give you dinner. And so I think that maybe that's a silly analogy, but the idea that I think God was going to provide this for them and he just wanted them to wait until he chose to give it to them would have been the best solution. I think that would have been pleasing in his sight.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I wonder too, and I'm doing some speculating here, but actually I can't, because that's a demerit. It's an incredibly interesting point, but unfortunately,
but our rules prohibit us.
Unfortunately,
from making interesting points.
Yeah, I'm not trying. Maybe if I could do a better job remembering these three verses when we get there, but I'm sure I'll forget.
Well, let me just say, I think what Joe just said, I have a suspicion that's probably true, because it sounds to me like, based on, and Joe already said it, Genesis 49, God intended to provide a king eventually. As you guys already said, they asked for a king, but it sounds like it was prematurely. It wasn't the right time, and so God got angry. But Again, I'm doing some speculating here. There might be a reason why God did not want them to ask for a king, or God was not going to give them a king when they were in the wilderness. And I think that the Israelites first needed to learn to obey God as their king. I think the wilderness time was kind of like preparatory. It was a way to prepare Israel for their living in the promised land. Like if they could follow God in the wilderness that was essentially miserable and dangerous, then they could certainly follow him in the promised land, which was a lot better situation, a lot better circumstances. So I think maybe once this mindset was developed in them, they'd be ready for a human king. Again, that's speculation, but I find it interesting that like God was not going to give them a king right away. They had to wait, and they were going to have to wait for actually quite a while. So I think that's my guess. It seems to me like if you read through the not the law portions of the Torah, but like where God says, I'm doing this, I'm testing you, I'm refining you. You get this sense in which the wilderness wanderings was like a time of sanctification for Israel, preparing them for the promised land and preparing them to have a human king rule over them. But that's just, there's some speculation there on my part.
So something that jumped out to me as interesting in these verses, and I've been raked over the coals about all the conditional statements so far that we've seen. God appears to know with certainty that they're going to do this thing that's displeasing to him. They're going to want to be like the other nations. They're going to ask for a king that is just like all the other nations. And yet that thing is actually displeasing to him. They ought not to do it. And in a certain sense, like, I think you can hear that coming through here. They shouldn't want to be like the rest of the nations, but God knows for certain that they will be, or that they will want that. Doesn't that show us that something about, God can know that a certain event that is sinful is certain to happen. He can have absolute knowledge of it. It's fixed. And yet it doesn't take away moral responsibility. They still ought not to do it. From their perspective, they have options, but from God's perspective, it's a fixed reality. Doesn't this seem to suggest that?
Yeah, but I find it interesting that God doesn't say, don't ask for this. He's had plenty of opportunity to say, don't ask for a king. I'm your king. But here he says, when you go in and when you ask for it, you're going to do it. You're going to put over you who I want.
But I mean, and this is a demerit, but he is actually displeased that they want to be like the rest of the nations.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly.
So that's the part that I'm talking about.
Okay, we're good. I just want to get somebody to demerit. There we go. Yeah, no, I agree, and so I find it interesting that there's this dangle, maybe call it foreshadowing, dangling of a carrot here, and so why not just say don't? No, don't do it. This would have done it anyway, right? But just don't do it.
All of us agree, on all of our conversations. I don't think any of us have ever disagreed that God infallibly knows the future. We all agree. The interesting part about it is it doesn't say with such specificity as some other things do, like when this is going to happen. He just says when this happens, this is how you are to do it. And that moral responsibility aspect, it does at least, I think, leave open the possibility or a suggestion that if they're obeying God, if they're doing what he says, that when they ask for a king or when they set a king over them or when this enters their heart, that it would actually be appropriate, potentially. But the possibility that they could have done this better, I think, is still suggested here. And as Greg's saying, he didn't tell them don't do it. So I do feel like there was potentially a way that they could have done it that wouldn't have been as upsetting to God. But the fact that they were going to ask for a king eventually, he is saying when that time comes, you must do it this way. And I guess we'll keep our eyes open for that. But I'm in full agreement with you, and I hope that I haven't ever said anything that would suggest otherwise. I do question the definition of knowledge, but the idea that God knows what's coming, of course he does. Like, he's not caught by surprise by things that come down the road.
So there's one part of what you said that I have there's a question mark in my mind about, and that's the whole timing aspect. God infallibly knows that certain things will happen. Does he infallibly know as a fixed reality what, like, the timeline on which those things will happen?
I would say yes, but I do think that sometimes there are potentially I've used this term multiple pathways before. There are some important texts, especially in the New Testament, that I think make this abundantly clear. We're just unfortunately way, way, way away from that. But yes, I do think that he knows the exact timing of things, but I also think that based on that definition of knowledge and that there are potentially multiple pathways through, one event could happen earlier than another in a potential timeline, and then based on what people do, which of those timelines becomes actual
okay. Yeah, could we make something happen sooner? Based upon our actions, could we make something happen sooner
or
make something happen later?
Does God infallibly know which timeline will be? Like which pathway will be taken, do you think?
This is the definition of knowledge that you got to continue to flesh out.
Yeah. I would say no, that is open. That's what answers some of the questions, like when God says, "Now I know that you fear me." Like when actions take place, the definition that I presented before, on a definition of knowledge that is justified true belief, a true value statement can be made of a disjunctive, an either or. And so if it's A or B, God can know in advance that A or B is going to happen. He can know infallibly those things, and then until they happen, whether it's A or B, then at the moment that it's chosen, that knowledge changes to actual rather than potential, but it is still justified true belief. And so do I think that God knows exactly which pathway will be taken? Yes, but it has to be on the definition that what I'm talking about. And I feel like that's where we maybe talk past each other. On the previous definition of knowledge that I understood before, then it would be everything is fixed, and then you get kind of pressed into the typical Calvinistic or Arminian, where either God decreed it and it couldn't be otherwise, or God looked through the corridors of time and he just, because of his foreknowledge, it couldn't be otherwise. I'm presenting an option that it actually could legitimately be otherwise. So that would be probably one of the biggest differences between yours and mine theology. And like I said, there are some other passages that are coming later that I think will make this case stronger, but I think it answers some of the questions that we've seen already better than the previous models that I used to hold to.
Maybe we're going too far afield here, but there were two statements that you made. When I first asked the question, does he infallibly know which timeline will be actualized? I thought you said no, and then
he does, but not on the way that you would say it. Like it is a disjunctive. So like if there's A or B, I would say there are two potential pathways, and yes, he knows that it will be one of those, and it doesn't. It doesn't matter to his ultimate purposes which one is chosen, because he will bring all things into conformity to his will. However, it will be one of those, but he does know it. But you have to use the definition of knowledge that I'm suggesting of justified true belief, because if you're using the definition that I'm sure that you're using, then he would have to know which one is actual and which one is only theoretically possible, which again, I would say on those definitions, it's not actually possible, because you're saying it's possible, but it can't possibly be, because it's already fixed. The decisions are what they are.
So the way I think about this, and it might not be helpful, and Joe might even go, "Oh, that's wrong. It's not what I'm saying at all." But imagine an infinite number of branching disjunctives that happen at the moment of creation. God is fully aware of every one of those, but as things happen in time, those branches are taken away because that there's no longer a potentiality, and we're working towards, a particular point as well.
I am more confined than that, just because I think that theoretically, the possibility is that I've used these bizarre things before, but like with physics, logically you could say, instead of moving forward or backward, you could move up. Well, yeah. But you can't though. There are physical constraints.
Yes. So it's not an infinite number, but
the possibilities are never
infinite number, or is at every decision point there are as many branches as necessary. And as we make those decisions, those branches that never materialize, that God knew, just now he knows they aren't. And
no, I really struggle with how that doesn't make almost the entirety of God's knowledge of his creation and the timeline within it entirely conditional. I really struggle with that.
I understand. It is a deviation from the main theological camps, but I think it makes so much more sense of Scripture And perhaps you and I can talk about it more if you haven't watched our, and I mean, not even just encouraging other people to watch. I'm even encouraging a participant of our show. If you haven't watched that other one, that's, we did go on for over an hour about explaining it. And I know that if you haven't gotten that, and if you're watching this now and you haven't heard that, it might sound like a bunch of gobbledygook nonsense, which is why I don't want us to talk too much more about it, because it does require some unpacking. And, we live in a soundbite culture. Unfortunately, not everything is so easy to just, you can't just state everything in a 30-second sound clip. Sometimes you do need a little bit of time to unpack things. This is one of those issues, I believe, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about that, but I just am not sure that we want to test the patience of our viewers anymore, since we have deviated from our intended topic of Deuteronomy 17, at least a little bit. And so I'm sorry for my participation in bringing us off track. But did we answer your question sufficiently?
To the fullest satisfaction.
All right. Well, let's move on to another question. I have a question about verses 18 through 20 of Deuteronomy 17. And according to those verses, the king was required to write for himself a copy of the law and read it all the days of his life, so that he would learn to fear the Lord and treat others right. So what does this reveal about sanctification? And for our viewers, when I say sanctification, I mean transformation into the likeness of God, becoming like God. So the question is, how does that all work?
Well, I guess I don't want to go too far, because you're bringing in some theologically charged terms that I don't necessarily know are the point here. But what it seems to me is when you've been given a standard, the less time you spend immersed in or concerning yourself with or focus on that standard, the easier it is to drift away from it. And so, if the expectation is that on a daily basis or a near daily basis, we are going in and checking in with the standard and reminding ourselves of the standard, it's going to be a lot easier to call those things to mind. So whether this has something to do with some heart transforming sanctification, I think just if that's there, yay that, but on a mere practical everyday level, when I was in the Air Force and, I did jobs on jets, and we had technical orders that were supposed to have the technical order. Like every time you touched it, you're supposed to have this thing in your hand. But I'm like, man, I refueled a jet like 5 million times. Still got in trouble if I didn't have that technical order in my hand, even though I could have done it blindfolded and often didn't. And so, yes, continually returning to the standard, it has a regulative value. And so that's what I think is going on here.
So it's going to be a demerit fest for me today. I think this is too good to pass up.
They usually are.
I'm pretty sure Psalm 1 is actually a reflection of King David on this exact command. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields fruit in its season. Its leaf doesn't wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so. They're like the chaff that the wind drives away. So I think that there's something about constant exposure and the blessing of sanctification that it brings. Day and night is what David says in Psalm 1. Constant exposure. And I think that kind of rubs against and creates friction with how we think about exposure to God's word in our culture, or like how most people approach their quiet times or whatever they want to call them. Most people are approaching it from like they're looking for some sort of spiritual high. They're looking for some sort of emotionally charged experience. If I don't get, a certain number of goosebumps on the back of my neck in each
You think that's why people skip Leviticus and genealogies and stuff?
Yes. If I don't get a certain number of goosebumps on the back of my neck, if I don't have a certain emotionally charged experience with my devotions where I'm just a puddle of tears before the Lord, then it hasn't been a profitable time. I haven't really met with the Lord, and I just don't think that's really how feeding on God's word works. Sometimes it looks less like a steak dinner and more like a hot dog. sometimes you
God's
just
word never looks like that's blasphemy.
I was going to say it's more like broccoli. How about that?
Yeah, can we use something a little bit better
value.
than hot dogs?
I mean, just in terms of the overall experience, right? The experience of feeding.
The quality.
Sometimes you're like in the
It's
middle
kale.
of.
It's good for you.
Sometimes you're in the middle of cleaning
tastes
up
like
a
dirt.
pool of vomit for one of your kids, and you're going to change a diaper, and you're rocking one of them to sleep, and you're reading your Bible on your phone, like, and you're still feeding. You're still feeding while doing that. It's not the same sort of grandiose experience, but you're still exposing yourself to God's word. Constant exposure is what we're after.
Yeah. Well, let's just look at what the text actually says, because it says, starting in 19, it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. And how would he do that? By observing all the words of this law and these statutes. And notice verse 20, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. Notice that the part where it says, so that his heart may not be lifted up. It's almost like as he reads this, he realizes how far he has fallen, from the standard, and how far he could fall if he just disregards God's word. The law had a way of humbling people. As I read through the law, there was things that I was reading, and I thought, geez, maybe I need to change that about me. The law, you look at it, and it has a way of humbling you, because you see how far you've fallen from God's standard, and it makes you really appreciate God's grace, and it helps you to not elevate yourself above others, because you realize, if I was to be judged by this standard, I would fall just like everybody else. So
I think for people in authority, right? Especially, I mean, if you occupy a position of authority where you walk in the room and everybody stands, or you walk in and everyone kneels, I think this even goes for pastors, right? Whether you deserve it or not, or whatever, you are afforded this honor, and so how much more important it is for you to ensure that your heart isn't, inflated, or your head isn't inflated, for that matter, and to maintain the humility that is appropriate for that office.
Very well said. Well, why don't we move into chapter 18 in the first 8 verses or so, talk about the Levites and these priests, that they are supposed to be provided for by the first fruits. Is this different than the tithe? Is this supplemental? Is this the same thing? How do you guys read this, that they're supposed to live off the first fruits here? We talked about the tithe last time. Same, different? What do you think?
I just assumed that this was different. The first fruits and the tithe are not the same thing. The first fruits were, as you guys already know, the initial yield of the harvest, whereas the tithe was 10% of a person's income or their produce. And the first fruits were given at the beginning of the harvest, but tithes were collected, sounds like, all throughout the year. It wasn't just, it was more regular, I guess I'll say, than the first fruits. I kind of viewed this as supplemental, but without doing a deep dive into it. That's really all that I have to say.
Do you think that there's anything here about the nature of what is given, similar to what was talking about, like with the unblemished animals, that this isn't, when giving the tithe, it's not supposed to give the leftover 10th% or the last, or the kind of the little runts at the end of the growing season. That you're supposed to give of the first and the best, so that you're not providing, to the Levites or to the poor of the land or to anybody else, kind of the leftovers, but you're actually giving the priority and the best. I've heard teaching on tithing in general, and usually it's people talking about tithing now, but that the tithe isn't just 10%, that it is the first 10%, and this might be a qualification, that it is describing what is given in the tithe, but it's also the first fruits, that these things work together, not as a supplement, but as a qualification almost, that the 10% that you give is the first and best rather than any other 10%. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how much I'm not convinced that the Old Testament tithing system that was incorporated with festivals ought to be as directly carried over to a New Testament model as we like to do it.
I'm not interested in trying to make that connection.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just asking for this. Like, is it, you're thinking even of Cain and Abel, they both made an offering, but one was acceptable and one wasn't.
And so what I was going to say is, I think this continues that principle. And so as we see the Cain and Abel, as we see in chapter 17, as we see here in chapter 18, I think that still establishes and continues to model the principle that we should use to help us understand what we ought to be doing today. But trying to pull the specificities of those practices and shape them enough to fit, no. Principle, I think it's an enduring principle that will go on until the end of eternity. So,
Micah, do you have any thoughts?
I do not.
All right. We can move on then.
Yeah, so in this kind of maybe setting up for future conversations, surely is setting up for future conversations. We've heard of promises that are enduring promises. We talk about promises of land and whatnot. Here we see a promise, verse 5, the Lord your God has chosen him and his sons, the Levites, from your tribes to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. Based upon this, should they have been expecting a change in that situation?
I think, well, we've talked about this a little bit before. The Hebrew word olam, which is translated forever, does not necessarily mean unending. It can. In some texts, it does mean unending. In other texts, it can't mean that. What the Israelites thought of the Levitical priesthood, I'm not entirely sure. It's really hard to answer this question without getting a demerit.
Do it.
All of my questions today are aimed at getting you guys demerits. So,
well, I'm going to try and resist temptation.
Eric, would it make any difference if this isn't olam here? Because it isn't.
Oh, it's not.
Kol,
oh, okay.
It's kol yom.
Yeah.
No, how is that different?
For all days.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because I hadn't looked at that. Again, my answer would involve getting a demerit, but
and I think that's because there's so many things where we go, well, obviously it's not forever because God ended it. Well, okay, but so then how do we get to make? Is it just the things that have ended that we get to go, oh, obviously, and the things that haven't aren't, or the things that because we have other things that we expect to happen, we go, well, obviously it's going to start again because look, God said forever. And so I just find instances like this, because we base so much other theology on forever, we can just so easily dismiss this forever. Well, because obviously God ended that, so it's not forever.
This is one of the reasons I would, along with most people who are in my theological circles, would hold the New Testament interpretive priority. How do you define when forever is actually for all of eternity? And then when forever in the Old Testament just literally means not literally, but simply means for a long period of time, because it can have both meanings. How do you determine that? You determine that from the nature of the new covenant itself, the nature of the consummated revelation. I think you have to have New Testament interpretive priority to answer the question that you're asking, Greg.
I'm in almost full agreement with that. Of course, I know that there are some places where that principle you and I disagree, and I'm not going to run ahead to those, but I do think that the New Testament priority certainly helps us to focus on some areas where maybe you would have read it one way, but then you go, oh, well, let me take a closer look at this. And so just like, Eric, the reason I asked you the question of would it change, you are correct. Olam doesn't always mean forever and ever, into eternity. And if you actually just look at the way that the word is used, as Greg has mentioned before, words, they don't always mean exactly the same thing. They have a range of meanings. And so you have to understand what is being said in the context. And so as he's talking about this priesthood, the Levites will serve. God is saying something similar to what he said about, the tribe of Judah will produce a king, and the scepter will not depart from that place. He's not going to change which tribe the kings come from, just like he's not going to change which tribe the priests come from for this defined period, for all of the yams, for all the days. But that doesn't necessarily mean forever. And so now, because, obviously, I like Greg, I love the tone of voice that you use. Obviously, it's not that anymore. And should we see some things like, oh, I don't know, a figure that is, so supposedly mysterious that we saw in Genesis 18, like Melchizedek or something, if there's some discussion about a different type of priesthood that is to come, it doesn't contradict what is being said here, because these days, for all of these days, it will be Levites. But should these days come to an end and a new day should dawn, that's not being prohibited by the language here, just like it wouldn't be if olam was used. So either phrase can communicate that, I think. And, would it take something extremely significant to change this? Yes. But if a change happened and you look back, is God saying that it could never change? I don't think the language is so strong as to say it could never change.
So when it says all times, is this, I mean, again, I'm trying to, if I was to just read this without the New Testament, and Mike, I agree with you. I think that, like, there's things in here you don't get a direct answer on until you get to the New Testament. The New Testament, I think, in this case, gives us the answer. But if I was just reading this without the New Testament, would the most natural way to read this be forever unending, or could it just mean, as long as the old covenant lasts, as long as this particular covenant lasts?
I think that way. As long as this old covenant lasts for the entire duration of it, the Levites are the priests.
Okay,
that's what I think is the.
So that would make sense to me. That would also fit with a lot of other texts.
I would agree with that totally, but I'm not convinced from prior reading that they wouldn't have thought that this was an unending covenant.
Oh boy, I got a question, but I'm not going to ask it. But maybe we can talk after the.
Look how giddy you are.
Episode. Anyway, well,
now. All right.
Well, no, now you got to ask it. I'll tell you what.
No, it's a demerit.
Oh, okay. Well,
so I'm
okay. I'm okay if you ask it all the same.
I know you are,
Greg is really trying to have the gap be close.
We've got a party.
He's so lonely out in front.
I think it's really close.
We've got a party hat for you, Eric. Join the party.
I'm trying to resist. I'm trying to rise above.
We can move on if you don't want to.
Okay.
Ask your question.
Anyway, my next question is dealing with the list of pagan practices that in verses 10 through 11 that some might view, and actually I've heard people say, well, if you just look at the things that the Bible claims are real things, well, the Bible's a work of fiction, because these passages include things like witchcraft and sorcery and things like that. And of course, those things aren't real things, according to many modern people. They'll say things like, so you believe witches are real? How would you respond to this kind of attitude? Because I've heard questions like this over and over again. I know what I've said to these guys before, but how would you guys respond to an attitude like that?
Well, the funny thing is you defined the problem in your question when you said modern people. Modern people in our post-industrial, enlightened time, we're chronological snobs, and so we deny the fact that these things, wherever they come from, whatever they are, they were things, regardless of whether or not we think they held power or held sway or whatnot. So the reality is to this day, people are doing something that could be classified as witchcraft, things that people themselves who are doing them classify as witchcraft, and that is in itself evil. So whether or not they had any power, and we see throughout our Bible, and we already have seen examples, and we will see more examples of where these things do have power. So the fact that your, again, chronological snobbery says, well, it doesn't mean anything, therefore the Bible is silly, well, that's a perspective.
So usually I respond to their laughter by laughing at them for not believing in that these things are real things. Because it is, that is almost the essence of silliness. Like, for thousands of years across multiple cultures, people have recognized that there are these people who, for whatever reason, can do things that nobody can explain. And whether you want to call them call it witchcraft, call it whatever you want. Obviously, the Bible has an answer.
Look
for
at
it.
David Blaine. Hello.
I don't
Are you
know
saying
who
he's
that
a
is.
sorcerer?
It's like,
Yeah, exactly. Dude, burn him. Somebody go there and burn him.
But and obviously the Bible has an answer for it. It's demonically inspired. It's not natural powers that people possess or anything like that. But it's the Enlightenment rationalist that is behaving foolishly because they deny almost the universal testimony across multiple cultures for all of time about the existence of these people. So, that's what is foolish. Now you don't have to be superstitious about how these people get these abilities. You can just recognize what the Bible tells you. Like God says there's a spiritual dimension and there's interaction between our world and that world. Not really that they're separate worlds, but you know what I'm saying. There's interaction between the unseen,
different realms.
The unseen and the seen realm. And I say all that to say at least some of those people in Salem deserved it.
Wow, that took a turn.
That's
a harsh
a
turn
bold
at the
stance,
end.
Cotton.
Yeah, I'm.
I'll stop just short of that.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with everything you guys said, but in any event, I'll make a related point to what you guys were saying, and I think anybody who's laughing at these types of ideas, like, have you not driven through your town and seen that there's like a tarot card reader in your town, or someone who, have you not? I know people don't open up newspapers anymore, but like, do you not realize that like astrologers and people who will interpret omens and tell you about the stars or whatever, these people are still all over the place. Now, in our modern day, maybe someone who is, Greg, to use some of your terminology, post-industrial enlightenment type thing, maybe they think there's no power behind it whatsoever. Micah, you're insinuating there is power, but let's just say you think there's no power behind it whatsoever. This verse says, make sure that nobody who practices these things is found among you. So if you think it's ridiculous, the Bible's so ridiculous, preposterous, you believe that witches are, do you not realize that there are probably Wiccan clubs in your town right now? There are places where people are practicing these things right now.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's absurd when people make the claim that, well, science has disproven the supernatural. Science isn't even designed for that purpose. Science can disprove some things, for sure, but it's going beyond the ability of science to make the claim that science can disprove the supernatural. It's like, you're trying to, like, I don't know, detect the presence of time using a thermometer or something. Well, it's just not designed for that. It doesn't work for that. Science is not designed to expose or to disprove or whatever the spiritual realm. It's just not designed for that purpose. And think about this. And this doesn't prove anything, but it's more of a probabilistic kind of thing. Countless people throughout history have claimed to have had supernatural experiences, not just long ago, but like you were saying, Joe, today people have these experiences all the time. Somewhere in the world, people are having experiences like this. And these claims undoubtedly number in the billions by now. So what are the odds that every single one of these people is either mistaken, lying, or crazy? I mean, the odds are very remote that nobody out of the billions and billions of experiences that have happened, it's very unlikely that every single one of those can be explained by being mistaken, lying, or crazy.
Especially when we have a sound biblical explanation for at least some of them, because some of them are lying and crazy and whatnot. But
sure, and I'm not saying therefore believe every one of them.
I'm
saying there has to
that.
be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very likely that somebody out there has had a genuine supernatural experience out of the billions and billions and billions that have occurred. And so I think it's very naive. We're so sheltered in the West. We just take for granted. Well, everywhere in the world is probably like the West, and all of history has been like the West. Well, no, that's very far from the truth. There was someone in my family. I'll just a very quick story. This is going to sound maybe a little corny or something, but there was someone in my family who there was a group of them playing with a Ouija board, and they, keep in mind, these are people that they had no experience with any kind of demonic stuff, nothing. This was their first time doing something like this. They asked the Ouija board or whatever, the spirit, they said, well, what is the birthday of our grandpa? And they had no idea what it was. All of them said, we have no idea what it was. And the Ouija board thing moved around and gave them the date of their grandpa's birthday. Now,
it's moving.
6. Now 7.
Back to 6 again. What does that mean?
It's just looping. 7.
That can't be good.
Why those numbers?
It
Burn
freaked
the
all of
house,
them
salt
out.
the earth, and move away.
It freaked them all out. They threw it away and never messed with it again.
Get out the gallows.
So,
Just kidding.
you know, again, but like, and some people might go, oh well,
because everyone in Salem deserved it, or at least some of them.
But again, I'm just that's a probably less than convincing example. But the point I'm trying to make is these examples are in the billions, no doubt. And modern, this is an American person.
You know, when I go to serve down in Guatemala, because it's still to this day a very animistic, pagan, offering animal sacrifices. The effects of that are very real, very obvious. No one down there in that culture is denying the negative effects of that and the positive effects as Christianity comes in and those powers are reduced. And so, yeah, we are sheltered a bit from that in the industrialized West.
So what I find ironic about the person who looks down their nose at things like this in the scriptures, I wonder if you were to ask a number of them if they believe in extraterrestrials, what they would say.
Now, Micah, that's scientific.
Yeah, exactly. But it just exposes a framework, doesn't it?
Yeah, don't you know that we were just seeded by some alien race from the past? That's science, bro.
Right, exactly.
That's
science,
Richard Dawkins.
It's science fiction. You know? Yeah. So it's foolishness.
Flat Earth.
The aliens could never get through the dome, okay?
I just don't know how they would catch it. You know, it's flying on that fast turtle, so I don't know how they would ever catch it.
That's great. I'm going to move us on and say I'm going to go ahead and withdraw my next question, Joseph. If you could do yours, that'd be great.
You sure?
Yeah, I am sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, we did discuss a little bit recently in one of our previous episodes about this test. I tried to run ahead to this one, and so now we finally arrived here. So I got a demerit last time, but in 18:20 to 22, there's another test, a second test about the prophet, and this is related to God's understanding of what's coming in the future and how God can tell the truth. So, any additional thoughts on this? I mean, I know we discussed it recently, so it doesn't have to be a long conversation unless you guys have some other new thoughts. But this is where I tried to rush ahead to. We finally arrived, so thank goodness.
Well, there's another layer of qualification to how to detect a true prophet, right? The first layer was detecting a false prophet was if he leads you to worship other gods, even if he's able to do, whatever, signs, wonders, if what he says comes true, like all this stuff. If he speaks in the name of an idol, of a false god, he's a false prophet. There's another layer to this, and that's presumably if someone speaks in the name of Yahweh, but what they say doesn't come to pass, what they say doesn't come true, that's also how you detect a false prophet. So there's a twofold test for anyone who would call themselves a prophet. Do they speak in the name of the one true God, and do the things that they're prophesying come to pass?
Yeah, and I actually think this is a really revealing text, because contrary to modern assumptions, the ancient Israelites were not gullible people who believed anything without evidence. God told them to be discerning, and he gave them a really great test.
They didn't believe things with evidence. That was their problem.
Yeah, well, if a prophet's words did not come to pass, they were not from God, and the prophet must be put to death, according to Deuteronomy 13:5. And the implication is that God's words can never fail to come true. So if someone claims to be speaking from God and their words don't come true, well, then they're lying. And this test also lends credibility to the prophets of Scripture, because if a prophet's prophecies ended up in Scripture, if they were canonized, well, that means that their words must have come to pass, at least some of them. I have a theory on this, and I can't prove it, but it sounds like, oftentimes prophets would have a prediction that would happen soon, but then they would also make predictions that would happen, farther into the future that couldn't be verified. But if a prophet's prophecies ended up in Scripture, that was an indication that God really was speaking to them, and what they said really, and I'm not talking about people like Balaam. I'm not, I'm talking about like the prophets that are recognized as true prophets of Israel. Their writings were canonized. I think that there was some reason why they were viewed as true prophets, why their prophecies were recorded, written down, and then kept, as
at the risk of getting myself to merit, like I'm trying to just make a technical correction. We will see. I anticipate we will see some prophets who were sent to prophesy that didn't have their work recorded. So I don't want to.
Well, of course, yeah,
yeah. So
sure, yeah, and I'm not saying every true prophet that's ever said anything has made it into the Bible.
Okay, I guess I thought that was the point.
I thought he was just saying if they were recorded, they passed. That test.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
But if they passed that test, they weren't necessarily recorded.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all I had. Yeah, I agree. Amen. Yay.
All right. Well, I have nothing else.
Oh, okay. All right. So, yeah, sorry. That goes to me then, doesn't it? Moving into chapter 19, we get to talk again about this Avenger of Blood. We saw it before, seeing it here again. And this is interesting to me. But as we read that, the Avenger of Blood might pursue the manslayer so as to overtake them, and they might do it in the heat of anger, we read here in chapter 19. And yet we're also told that the Avenger of Blood might overtake them in the heat of the anger, even though the manslayer didn't deserve death. That seems odd to me. Like, aren't you just setting up now another murder? Why not just outlaw, say, hey, you don't get to do this until, the person's been tried. So doesn't this set up kind of a loop where now the Avenger of Blood is in the wrong for having taken vengeance out on a manslayer who isn't guilty of murder?
That's a really interesting question. Actually, I had read this a few times after getting your question, and I'll just point out just a few things that might be worth something. The text implies, of course, that the Avenger of Blood assumes the manslayer is guilty of murder. That's why they're pursuing the person to begin with. That's why he's pursuing him in the heat of anger. Your question about excluding the possibility of an unlawful execution with the law preventing the death sentence without a trial, that is a really interesting one, because on the one hand, you can't legislate anger out of existence, but on the other hand, the law is worded in such a way that makes it sound as if like nothing could be done to stop the Avenger from killing the manslayer before the trial. It's almost anticipating a level of anger that's just totally uncontrollable. And it's like this guy is going to pursue the manslayer to his death. Now, I do, as we'll read later on, if a Avenger of Blood, if he wrongfully killed somebody, that was murder. Like you can't do that. Like it wasn't like it was allowed. The trial had to take place, but it's almost like the law is stated in such a way where it almost is like saying we can't stop this from happening. So I really don't have a good answer for that. But I kind of had the same question that you did.
I don't have a good answer either.
I don't have an answer, but I can speculate or at least think about. I think, Micah, you made this point when we were talking about the Avenger of Blood before, that the place of, or the cities of refuge, although it is a haven in one sense, it is also a penalty in another sense. And so, Greg, hypothetically, if we did it your way, they're not deserving of death, so the Avenger of Blood can't come after them. They don't have to flee to this city to flee away from the Avenger of Death. Or the Avenger of Blood, putting them to death, then they could just, conceivably, if I went out to my field, I accidentally kill you, I just go home and everything kind of carries on as normal because I don't have to go anywhere, I don't have to do anything, and I'm not going to be put to death. So by saying he's not worthy of being put to death, but it's not saying that there's not worthy of any consequence, I think this kind of mitigates that. Like there is a consequence. You do still have to go there, and you have to do it quickly, because if you don't, the Avenger of Blood might come. Now, you're not worthy of death, so he shouldn't put you to death, or however that works. But you do need to get your stuff and get to this city of refuge, because what you did has severe consequences. And the person that you killed, even if it is manslaughter, even if it was an accident, they're not going home to be with their family. So you better get out of here, and you better go to the city of refuge and get on over there. So, Mike, I don't know that had you not made those comments before, I don't know that I would have given this answer, but it made sense to me. And now as we're hearing this question, I go, well, this is a mitigating path.
And then as you read it, the manslayer still has to stay there, whether or not he's like.
I would think all the other things apply.
Yeah.
Yes, you're not worthy of death, but the other penalties
you still have to
still
stay
apply.
there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That's how I don't think this is a change to that.
Yeah.
You're not worthy of death, but you still stay there until what? The death of the high priest. Wasn't that what it was?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Nobody else has anything else? All right. Well, we can move on then. So same chapter, Deuteronomy 19, verses 8 and 9. I'm going to read it. It says, if the Lord your God enlarges your territory, just as he has sworn to your fathers, and gives you all the land which he promised to give your fathers, if you carefully observe all this commandment which I command you today, to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways always, then you shall add 3 more cities for yourself besides these 3. This gets back to what we were talking about before. It's another, yes, it's a conditional statement, but it does seem to indicate to me a hypothetical future. If it goes one way, and God enlarges you and you obey, then you're to do this. And if you don't, then theoretically you won't get to add these additional cities. And it is contingent based on what they're going to do. If everything is set, if everything is going to be exactly one way, whether it was because it was decreed or God is looking down the corridors of time, I don't know why we would read something like this. I don't know why God would put in these other potentialities if he can just say, when you get there, eventually you will grow and you will add these 3 cities, or when you get there, you're not going to obey me, so never mind, it doesn't matter. A statement like this is part of the reason, getting back to our earlier conversation, why I've kind of modified where I used to be. But I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on a conditional statement like this.
Yeah, I guess I don't really struggle with the conditional statements, because I have the understanding in my mind that he's talking to creatures who have no access to the kind of knowledge that God does. So we experience life in terms of causes and effects. If I obey God, then certain things will happen according to his covenantal promises. I just don't think it's intended to speak to what God's concrete, immovable plan is for this people. I think it's speaking to
Can I push back on that for a second?
Yeah.
Because before you get too much further down that road. So I disagree that they have no access to the way that God thinks, because this is literally God revealing to them how he thinks. And so this isn't them just coming up with something on their own. That's not how we view this. God is telling them what is going to happen. And so God is directly giving them access to his thoughts. And so if his thought is either you will need to add these cities, then just tell them that. Or if his thought is, you won't need to add these cities, so I'm not even going to tell you. I don't know why that creaturely aspect has to come in. That answer to me, it might be satisfying to you. It's just completely unsatisfactory to me.
Yeah.
Because if he had that, it wouldn't be if that and if this and if you do this. It was just when you do that, right? Like
Yeah.
what is he okay, so let's say your position is right. Then I want to ask the question, what is he trying to communicate with the if language? If it already is settled, why is he being circumspect about it? Why not?
Because
why build in a mystery?
Yeah. I don't really see the trouble with this. It's because creatures live in time. We don't have access to all the information. We have access to pieces.
And if creatures were talking, that would be satisfying. But this is God talking.
God is talking to creatures about their experience in time.
But that becomes so. If you do this in
your life, if you do this in your life, then this will result. If you do not do this in your life, then this will not result. It's not intending to speak to the exhaustive knowledge of God.
So when do we stop saying he said this, but it's really just condescended to the point where, and now because that you get to subjectively decide that, you have just subjectively decided that. When do we draw the line?
If God tells me, if you do certain things, you will die. God says things like that to people over and over again. And yet,
but what he means is, when you do this, you'll die.
And the psalmist says that God has determined the days of my life. God knows the hour that I will die. infallibly. So apparently the if statements are talking to me on one level to encourage me to do a certain type of behavior that is pleasing to God. But he still knows, he has access to all the information that I don't have. He still knows the day that I'm going to die. I see this in a very similar way.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about this before, and I don't know that we have time to rehash all of it, but Mike, I get what you're saying. And I get what the other guys are saying. I don't have I used to be more confident in my answers about this topic. I'm not as confident as I used to be. My mind hasn't shifted in any huge way, but there seems to be more ambiguity with these types of things than I originally thought. But if God is making a conditional statement, and God foreknows what the outcome is going to be, I guess my question is, does making the conditional statement determine or have some kind of effect on the outcome? Is God making the conditional statement to bring about a certain outcome, or is God making the conditional statement because this is actually possible for the future to turn out differently? How would you, like, because I guess,
so you're talking about some kind of butterfly effect, like,
well, like in Micah's defense, I will defend him on this point, that God has to say something, right? Like he can't, just to not say anything like this. God can foreknow, or let me give you another example. God can warn somebody to not turn away from Him. Okay, and then as time goes on, the person doesn't turn away, and the person is faithful to the end. In that case, was the warning given to basically to produce that effect, that the person would not turn away, or was the warning given for some other reason? Because if it was given to produce that effect, but then there's
if we're gonna go down that route, first of all, there's no way to answer it, and second of all, it has no ending. I find that an impossible path to walk down with any sort of logic.
Eric, can you maybe repeat that in a little bit different words? Sorry, I'm having trouble following.
So,
here.
Okay, so your position is that God not only does he foreknow, but he's predetermined it, or is that?
Yeah,
in some sense.
I think his decree is comprehensive, yeah.
Okay. So when God gives a warning, right? Like if he gives a warning, don't fall away. Okay, don't turn away from me. And then time goes on and the person doesn't fall away. And they die faithful.
Yeah.
Okay. That conditional statement, that warning, don't
is
fall
used
away,
to produce his desired ends. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's actually one of the ways that warnings function in the Christian life. I think that the warnings in certain passages drive me to trust more deeply in Christ, and ultimately, when I get to the end of the road, I'll see, well, that's what God had planned for me. But he uses means to accomplish his varying ends. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this.
What I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say God gives a warning, and the person doesn't remain faithful. They do turn away from God.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the purpose of the warning if he foreknew that they were going to just go ahead and rebel anyway?
Yeah. I think it increases their guilt. Because once again, I mean, you might think this is inconsistent, but I think that God has decreed the things that will come to pass, but he's decreed that these things will be accomplished freely by creatures. So,
did he do it to produce their guilt then?
Once again, I don't,
because he knew the outcome. Did he do it to increase their guilt?
I think that it functions to increase their level of responsibility because of the amount of light that they had.
Well, I guess my point was just that it's like if he, and again, this is a problem for someone that believes in exhaustive foreknowledge also. So I'm not claiming that I have a simple, straightforward answer to it, but it seems like, at least in my position, if God is giving a warning, that warning can accomplish the purpose for which it was given. Like, it can turn someone away from rebellion and toward God and help them to remain faithful. But so I guess I look at the warnings and the like where it says, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this other thing will happen. I guess I look at that as like that's just true. Like, this really will happen to you if you obey. This other thing really will happen to you if you disobey. And if God is giving these conditional statements, I mean, I guess you could say, well, the conditions there and to drive the ones that he's chosen in the right direction and to drive the other ones in the wrong direction that are chosen for, damnation or something. I don't know. It's it's very confusing, because even if you take the position of exhaustive foreknowledge, you still run into a problem. I just don't think it's as severe of a problem, because God is not how did you put it in the beginning? Like, his decretive will.
Yeah. But
like, I guess I don't see it exactly like that.
I still think you have the problem, though, because he looked, whether you think, the Arminian thinks that he has exhaustive foreknowledge because he looks down the corridor of time and then chooses to actualize that reality in creation. Okay, but you still have to say that he approved of it and said it was good. So at some level, I think that you'd run into the same pickle that
Yes.
that the more deterministic view of God's foreknowledge has. I don't think it gets you off the hook. I think
It does
that
not.
opposing views get you on the hook for bigger problems.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah, Micah and I, you had said earlier in the episode that you've kind of been raked over the coals on these conditional statements. I hope you don't feel like we're getting
no, that
up
was
on
just
you.
a joke of that.
Sure.
Was just,
So I want you to know that I am gaining.
Yeah, but like what
gang
you
of
just said,
one.
Micah, I'm in full agreement with you. I don't think that this is a unique problem to your camp. I think that both you and Eric are on the same hook for the same problem. And the mystery that you appealed to earlier, Micah, was that the mystery is that it is going to be this way, but you still, and it is God's decretive will, but the humans, the creatures are still responsible. And I think you appeal to mystery there. Like, you can't necessarily explain why, but you know that is true.
Yeah.
You believe that God decreed it, and they are responsible. Okay. The Arminian, Eric, I'm not trying to speak for you, but tends to say, well, my solution resolves the mystery of why the creatures are still responsible. But yet both of you guys, I think, either camp, and I don't mean you guys, individually, although I do think it applies to you, but these bigger camps broadly are still on the same thing. What my question is talking about, could these conditionals, these hypotheticals, could they actually be different? And of course, I do agree with you, the open theist who then opens the door completely, that actually would, in at least some versions of it, actually questions God's knowledge and said God doesn't know, he's only a good guesser or something like that, or that somehow God isn't able to infallibly bring about his purposes. Those are bigger problems. The view that I'm trying to present, and again, I'm not sure that it answers all these questions. It does for me, but it's part of why we talk about these things, bring these things out. I genuinely believe that these conditionals are real, and that, both
and
of
so
you
do
guys.
I, actually.
Well, but how could you? Because if God is looking through foreknowledge, there is no potential. Like, I can theoretically say, in the example you gave, all right, someone who God knows is not going to fall away, and then a different person who God knows will fall away. He gives them the same warning, but the outcome is never different. It couldn't be otherwise. There is no... The conditional might sound like it could go otherwise, but if God infallibly knows the future and he already has looked through the corridors of time, there isn't different decisions that could be made. They are
But the
locked.
decisions were made
you
by
end
the
up deterministic
individuals.
either way. Agreed, but they couldn't be otherwise. I'm
Well,
saying
and that's-
that they
it-
could be otherwise.
Well, and and maybe like we've said before, my view, I can't even articulate exactly mechanistically how all this works, because I honestly don't know. I have the the lame answer. It's a mystery. I think there is. I think there is a.
both
I
appeal
think there
to
is
it.
mystery here. I
It's
really.
everybody's
I really do.
favorite answer, but just to different problems. Of
It's
course,
a cop out. I'm
I'm
but
trying to be more generous than that.
but all I'm saying is I don't know for sure how all this works, But I see all these verses about things could have been different had you done this. And I have a list of verses in my notes. I mean, it's a pretty long list where God says things like that, and God even acts as if, the route that you took, you didn't have to take that route. You could have taken something differently. And if you did take a different route, you would have arrived at a different destination.
That is the thing that I'm trying to preserve.
Yes, and so am I. And I don't know how that can be harmonized with my admission today. I don't know. I don't understand how all this works. I've thought about this so much. It feels like my head's going to explode.
For the cold open, can you just
answer.
Re-say that? But I don't know anything.
I don't know anything, period. What am I think? I don't even know what I'm thinking.
Yes. So anyway, the Arminian system, the Calvinistic system, and I'm not trying to frustrate you guys. And for all clarity, you guys aren't frustrating me. I appreciate the conversation. I'm not intending to frustrate you guys. If I am, I'm sorry for that part. The interesting thing is that all of these systems that have been presented, they do provide a coherent view that answers most of the questions and then appeals to mystery at some place. I am wondering if there is a system of thought that could be arrived at that doesn't need to appeal to mystery on certain areas where God, I think, has just told us. And I don't want to speculate why God said this, and he could have. He just literally said, if a prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh and what he says doesn't come to pass, and you know that it's not from me. So he very easily could have followed that up and saying, and by the way, I would have given you more refuge cities, but you guys aren't going to obey me, so you're not going to do that. Or he could have just left this part completely out, and the Bible could have been shorter because he didn't need to bring in this extraneous information. The constant seeming reference to things could go differently does seem to suggest to me that neither the decretive will, suggested in what you're providing, is satisfying to me. And again, I understand it is to you. I'm not saying that you need to change your mind. Maybe I am the one who needs to change my mind. And neither am I saying that the Arminian view of foreknowledge that looks down the court, you end up in the same spot. And quite frankly, you end up in the same spot as godless physicists who think that if you actually understood all the principles of physics and cause and effect, you could articulate in a hard deterministic way everything that happened from the Big Bang until down the road. All of our thoughts and everything else are these chemical reactions, and it's just this mechanistic thing that is just unfolding. It might feel like we have free choice, but we don't really. Yet, to me, in order for us to really be worthy of condemnation, our choices have to be genuine. That just seems to be, and I realize that's that is not. I know the Calvinistic answer to that, like I said, it used to be what I would say, and I'm no longer persuaded by it. But I'm not going to say that it's like a bad answer. As I read Scripture, I've moved away from that personally. So I'll leave it there for me. If you guys have other things to add, you can have the last word.
I guess I have a question about. I mean, I've tried to be open about where I think my knowledge about these things can end. I think that there's a couple of different ways that the Bible talks about actions in time. I think that it talks about them in certain ways and very, God says, or God decreed this would happen, and then human beings are responsible for their actions. I think those are two ways that we see explaining it, and I don't have any way to draw a map of how to get from one to the other. So I've tried to be open about my appeal to mystery in that sense. And you mentioned that we have systems that try to account for as much of the information as we can, while appealing to mystery at certain points where we just can't, we just fall short. What I want to know is where do you appeal to mystery?
I said I was going to be done, then you directly asked me a question.
Because I would love to hear you appeal to mystery.
I rule it a fair question.
I would love to hear you appeal to mystery because, I think that you would at some point. Because, I have questions about your system too. How does it make God anything but conditioned by the creature? That's one of my huge questions. Is that mystery?
No, that question wouldn't be. But no, I do. And again, we're going to get here later in Deuteronomy. I think that the things that God, let's focus on an issue where we all agree, at least. We're all Trinitarians. So some people would say, it's mystery, we can't understand it. No, we can. Here's why we can, because God has told us. And so that's why I pushed back on the area that I did of what you were saying. Like your answer was assuming, well, they don't have, we're creaturely, so we don't have direct access to God's knowledge. No, but we do though, because this is God speaking and he's telling us. And so I don't want to appeal to mystery there, because mystery is, I think mystery is one of the most abused words. Mystery, actually, in biblical language, I think we'll see this when we get, is that the mystery is something that God has revealed to us, not something that he's hidden from us. And so I want to appeal to the things that God has revealed to us. God knows the future, I agree, and human beings are responsible, I agree. And then we apply mystery over things. That's the part that I'm pushing back. But yes, of course I have areas where I could say, I don't know. God hasn't told us. I have no idea. This is something that God is telling us, a conditional statement. And so what I don't want to do is say that this conditional statement isn't actually a conditional, that it's just, using Greg's language, it's just condescending to us, just from our perspective. If it is, then why couldn't, the question that Greg asked that I don't know that it got answered, is the same question that just nags in the back of my mind. If God is trying to communicate that this isn't a condition, that he knows exactly what's going to happen, why in the world would he couch it in this language? It just seems so odd. Why would anybody communicate this is the path by saying it could be otherwise? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. What makes sense to me is when he says, well, it could be otherwise, is that, spoiler alert, it could be otherwise. Okay. And none of the main systems allow for that, because regardless of how we look at it, either God's decretive will, can't be otherwise, or God looked through the corridors of time, he knows everything, it can't be otherwise. Why continue to say that it could be otherwise if it can't be otherwise? Okay. That just doesn't make any sense.
And I think I understand. To the charge of like God is subject to conditionality, well, there's the obvious answer of, if you do this, I, says the Lord, am going to step in and do this, and I'm going to correct you. And so one of the branches of possibilities, one results in a blessing that keeps you on your path, and another ends up with you getting smacked across the mouth and now forced into the path that I want, right? Like it's...
Yeah.
That's the answer to the question that Mike had directly asked. So, I don't think that it is God being reactionary or us manipulating God. God defines what he's going to do, and he tells us in advance, if you do this, this is what I will do. If you do this, this is what I will do. I want to do one of these things. I don't want to do the other one, but that's not him. That's not us forcing his hand or us having power over him.
Because he's the one that made the conditions.
Exactly.
Okay. So I appreciate all that, and I mean, so we're covering ground we've already been over. My question to you, I guess, is what tensions do you see within your system that you have a hard time explaining? That was my question.
Oh, yeah, that's another longer thing. They exist, but
I'm not going to tell you.
Well, we'll probably get to them. I admitted one before, like we talked about. We did talk about when I said we talked about regeneration. Does it precede faith, or does faith precede regeneration? I don't think the Bible's clear on this, so I don't know. I know that the gospel needs to be presented. People need to believe it, but exactly how the ordering of that goes, I don't know. And when we go beyond the text and we try and overly define it, then what we tend to do is we create division, and we become arrogant against one another because we hold to the answers that we came up with because we think it must be this. And I just, quite frankly, God didn't tell us that. And so what I do know for sure is that people can't believe on him whom they've not heard, and how will they hear unless they preach, and how will they preach unless they're sent. So how beautiful are the feet of him who brings good news. But as far as like, what is the mechanistic machinery behind when the gospel is proclaimed? Is it God's effectual grace? Is it prevenient grace? I just don't know. And that's when I don't want to add those other things. So an area like that, is one of many. Often they are things that people fight about. And I think they go beyond the text. This isn't going beyond the text to me. This is just trying to represent what the text actually says. And I think we've created new difficulties here that, they just, if we weren't born, Greg, you talked about this anachronistic problem. If we weren't born with these systems in mind, if we weren't born this side of the Reformation, if we were just reading these things, I don't think anybody reading this would go, well, God already decreed, or he already knows what we're going to do. And so, he's given us this hypothetical, but it's just it just seems to destroy the language that is there. And I think these philosophical presuppositions about God's relationship to time and stuff like this, it's almost impossible for us to unread those things out of the Bible, which I don't think God put there. I think we put those things there, and I'm trying to untangle from that. So you keep making me talk more. I've been trying to stop talking, and now I'm
just trying to get you to admit that at some point, like, I just want to be. I admit it. I just want to be open. Yes. I want to be open about where I think my ability to connect dots ends. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone, and I'm not saying you're not open to doing that. I just wanted to hear you do it.
Fair enough. If I haven't done that satisfactorily to you, I will at least acknowledge that you have done that, and I don't think you're being arrogant or something. I think that you are, I just, out of love for you, if you say, I don't think these dots can be connected or whatever, I'm going to say, well, maybe I think they can, and I'm going to present that for you, but we don't have to necessarily agree. I like you either way. So anyway, hopefully you still like me.
I do.
But I have to be done talking now. So
No, we need more material for our new YouTube channel, Lord of the Rants, wherein Joe rants and raves about different things.
What question are we on?
I think Eric's got the last
I think
question.
Eric does have the last question.
Okay. I wasn't sure where we were even at on the sheet. So my question is,
we've gone well beyond the sheet.
my brain is cooked right now. So my question is, do verses 15 through 21 shed any more light on the eye for an eye law we discussed earlier? The eye for an eye law, I think, is mentioned in, I want to say it's in Exodus and maybe even Leviticus also. It's mentioned in a couple different places. But does this text shed any more light on that particular subject? Cool. Well, I'll give my answer. So in verse 19, we learned that a false accusation meant to bring harm to somebody is grounds for applying the eye for an eye law. So even if the action isn't taken, if you make a false accusation against somebody and let's say the accusation is meant to cause their death or something like that, well then whatever the accuser intended to do to the accused was to be done to them. So I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, it makes sense to me, and I kind of appreciate that about the law.
Amen.
I didn't have anything additional.
Amen.
Wow. Okay. I think we're burned out from the previous discussion.
It's my fault.
No, it's well, okay. Yeah, it's your fault. How about that? Well, if you're still watching this and you liked the episode and enjoyed the episode and benefited from our conversation, think about clicking that like button or the share button or any of those other buttons that are down there. You've heard what we think. We'd be delighted to read what you think. So go ahead and leave us a comment below if you agree with us or you disagree with us, or if we left something out after all this time. If we didn't talk about something, Greg at least lopped off one of his questions. So maybe you have a question that we didn't talk about. We'd love to read about that in the comment section below. But until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
My brain is cooked right now.
Oh, obviously.